Hi, everyone. Welcome to Leisrealtalk. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to my live stream. And this is a much delayed program. We were supposed to talk about this last week, last Tuesday, and we delayed it for a week. Excuse me. So I know you've been waiting to find out what China's real unemployment rate is. Excuse me. Uh, so let's get started. China released its official unemployment statistics on May 16th for April, and this is by China's National Bureau of Statistics. And the unemployment rate for urban areas was 5.2% in April, and it's down 0.1% from March. Now, this percentage is based on surveys. Okay. Um, so and also it's announced that the unemployment rate for youth aged between 16 to 24 was a record high, over 20%. It's actually 20.4%. What's unusual about China's unemployment rate is that, first of all, it's based on surveys and it's not based on real employment data. And second of all, it's not national average. It's only for urban areas. So those are two of the the different definitions of unemployment rate. And also, China's standard employment is very low. According to the website of National Bureau of Statistics, a person who does 1 hour of work per week is considered employed. And the same number is 15 hours in the United States and 20 hours in France. And some Chinese economists also point out that the unemployment surveys did not include migrant workers who returned to their hometown from the cities due to unemployment. So that migrant workers account for 38% of China's total labor force. So it's a big variable that's missing in the calculation. So with all that said, we know the number released by the National Bureau of Statistics is not to be believed, right? So the question is, what is China's real unemployment rate? I found a study done by a group of Chinese financial journalists in 2017. It was published on a major Chinese news portal, Sina, on June 7th, 2017. I actually have a picture of that. Let me make this bigger. So this is a very thorough study. I already provided you the links. I provided all the links that I use as sources for this live stream already in the description. So this one is a very in-depth analysis. It studied 5 years of China's unemployment rate. And the title is Uncover the Truth of China's Unemployment Rate. And the author, let me talk a little bit about the author. Is if you can read Chinese, it says Mars Alliances of Journalists. And it has and I look it up. It has a description. It says independent, unique, and comprehensive. It's an alliance of 2,000 finance-oriented journalists, obviously Chinese journalists, who provide professional and in-depth financial insights. So it doesn't look like it's a small organization. It's it looks like it's quite substantial. And so they are the author of this study. And its conclusion, so I show you kind of a screenshot of their tabulation, their analysis on the left. It's all Chinese. I transcribed that. I'll show you the numbers in a little bit, but the conclusion is on the right. So it's a 5-year analysis, and it shows the national unemployment rate for the 5 years. The years is at the bottom. Is all over 20%. It's from 23.9% to 22.9%, right? So it's around 22, 23% for the 5 years from 2012 to 2016. But the urban unemployment rate is over 60%. That's according to their analysis. And its calculation, it's based on the amount of jobless people or amount of people who were unemployed in the urban areas divided by the urban workforce, right? The available, the people who would be available for a job. And so based on their calculation, the urban unemployment rate between 2012 and 2016 was all over 60%. When I saw that, and they went through they were very thorough and detailed in explaining their methodology and their rationale. So what I did, let me comment. What I did was I followed their model and updated with 2022 data. I want to see, according to their methodology, what China's unemployment rates would be for 2022. And I come up with a set of numbers that I will share with you. But before that, let me talk a little bit about the sources, right? So we use exclusively official Chinese data. So the sources are, this one is it's from the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security. They issue an annual report. So I use the 2022 annual statistical bulletin on the development of human resources and Social Security. So it has all kinds of employment data and labor data. That's source number one. Source number two is this report called Key Tasks of New Urbanization and Integration, Urban-Rural Development in 2022. So it has some kind of data that shows the separation, the breakdown between urban data and then the rural data. Source number three is the demographic data of 2022 by the National Development and Reform Commission. And there's a fourth source I didn't include here. It's really the data from the Ministry of Education, because I have to calculate the student population. So that's source number 4, but it's a minor source. The link, you will see the link, but I just didn't do a screenshot here. So those are the official sources, okay? So now let's talk about the methodology. So first of all, let's understand China's labor force. The official definition of China's labor force is people between the age of 25 and 59. And then now let's talk about China's official retirement age. Right now, I think starting in 2022, China was or is in the process of increasing the retirement age from 60 for men and between 50 to 55 for women. So women in labor jobs, their retirement age before 2022 was 50 years old, and clerical jobs is 55. But they are in the process of increasing that to 65 for both men and women by 2030. So it's like they increase 1 year of age every 3 years for men, and every 6 years, no, every 3 years for women, and every 6 years for men. So by 2030, both men and women will have the same retirement age, which will be 65. So for my analysis, I just assume that right now the average retirement age is 60 for both men and women, because the increase started in 2022. But I know a lot of people work beyond 60, right? And then a lot of women. So for the most part, 60 is a very good number to use to calculate the workforce. And then we need to talk about the residents versus population concept. So if you look at the chart that I provided, China's population is kind of half and half between rural and urban. It's like 53% in rural and 47% in urban. But the number of residents are quite different. It's more skewed toward cities and urban areas. This is because 40% or 38% of the rural labor force, the migrant workers, there are 290 million of them, they are considered rural population, but they work in the city. So they are urban residents, but rural population. So that's an important concept. So if you go by population, it's one view, and if you go by residency, it's another view. I also want to point that out. Okay, so with that said, let's take a look at the numbers. Okay, here we go. So let's first count. The first thing I did is I calculated China's labor force, and I transcribed their numbers, their calculation from 2012 to 2016. So you see the box from column C to column G, that's their data, and it's in millions. So what they did is they first list China's total population. That's the first row, right? Row 22. And then they listed China's population between the age 16 to 59. And then the isolated population over the age of 60. We'll use this number later. In order to get the labor force, because China's labor force by definition is people between the age of 25 to 59. So what they did is they calculated the Chinese student population within that bracket. And student population is high school, basically high school, college, graduate studies, and also vocational schools. So they backed out the student population between that age group from the total population. So they get a national labor force that's highlighted in green. So I followed their formula and calculated for 2022. And you see how there's a decline in national labor force, right? The labor force, there's a decline. So it was 866 million, and now it's 787 million. In terms of the percentage of labor force to population, there's also a decline. It was 64% of the population, and it's now 56%. And I think this has to do with the aging population. And you see the percentage of population over the age 60 has increased from 14% in 2012 to 20% in 2022. Okay. Now, I also listed the urban population and rural population underneath that. The reason we list those two numbers is because we need to calculate peasant rural population over the age of 60, because these are considered the old peasants, and it's estimated because it's the way we just apply, we prorate it, because if 20% of the population is over the 60, 20% of the population is over age 60, then we assume 20% of the 752 million rural population is over age 60. This is very important because this number is, in rural China, people over the age of 60 still have to work because the peasants, they have to work to support themselves. Otherwise, they don't have any other means to make a living. So regardless of their age, older people all have to work in rural China in order to make a living. So this number is calculated, but we use that later. So this just builds the foundation to lay out China's labor force. Now let's take a look at the China's unemployment rate. So the way they calculate is this. So total national labor force, which is what we had, it's carried from the previous page. And then we listed the urban employment, and this came from the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security. This is the number of employments, all ages, in the urban area. And then it's broken down between urban and rural. So you have a national employment rate, right? So this is the number of jobs in China. And then we also get the migrant workers. So the migrant workers is also listed. I just want to show you how it has increased from 262 million in 2012 to almost 300 million in 2022. And then I also carry from the previous page the old peasants over 60 years old. So the age adjusted national employment between the age 16 to 59, we have to back out the old peasants who are still working over the age of 60. So row 11 is the difference between the national employment and then the old peasants over the age of 60. It's the delta between the two, because we have to remove the old peasants who are still working, who are included in the rural employment. They're considered employed, but they're over the age of 60, so they're not included in the national labor force, because that's only people under the age of between the age of 16 and 59 without the students. So to get an apple to apples comparison, we have to back them out. So that then we get a total national unemployment rate, right? Because once you get the adjusted national employment, then the difference between the employment and then the labor force is the unemployment rate. So row 12, the orange or the yellow line, highlighted line, but right before the percentage is the national unemployment number for that age group, for the labor force between 16 and 59 without the students. So it's comparable to China's official labor force between the age of 25 to 59. We think if we back out all the students, all the high school students, all the college and graduate school students, and all the students in vocational schools, we should have a comparable workforce between the age 25 to 59. So it should be very close. So if we do our math, then 2022's unemployment rate is at 26%. That's just my update with using their methodology, but with 2022 data. Now that seems high, right? That seems high. That means a quarter of the people who can work or who should be working are not working. So let's take a look at a breakdown between urban and rural area, because, like I said, it's a very interesting if you break down the numbers between the two areas. So here's my breakdown. The rural area. So I did the head count, total population, total residents, and then we have the labor force, we have the employed and the unemployed, and then we have the unemployment rate. So what you see is that in the rural area, 85% of the residents, I didn't say population, I say 85% of the people living in rural China are part of the labor force, or they are actively looking for a job, or they want to work. And then every one of them is employed, right? So it's 85%, 86%. It's like within the margin of error of 1%. So there's no unemployment rate. Everyone in rural China has a job, or they have to work. They have to work in order to support themselves if they live in rural China. However, it's very different in urban China. So the urban labor force is only 40% of the total residents living in urban area. And then 18% of the people living in urban China has a job. And so the unemployment rate in urban China is over 50%. It's 55.5%. And that brings the national average down to 26%. So you see how the unemployment is almost exclusively all in urban China. There's no unemployment in rural China. It's not because it's just because they have to work. Otherwise, they can't make a living. They're just very poor. This is according to this methodology. Now let's compare this to the United States. I just calculated the same comparison, like the percentage of American labor force to its population um, during the first, like as of March 2023, and it's 50%. And the amount of people employed to the total percentage is 48%. So if you compare that to the total Chinese number, if you look at the two green shaded areas, they're not that far apart. um, China has a higher percentage of total labor force. That means more higher percentage of Chinese work, but fewer of them. Only 41% of them has a job, compared to 48% of Americans have a job. So, I mean, the comparisons are similar. I mean, they're in the ballpark, right? But now the composition of American population and the Chinese populations are different. So I don't think they're really an apple to apple comparison. I think China's urban population is more of an accurate comparison to the American population, because I mean, the urban Chinese includes the small towns in China. It's not like just Beijing, Shanghai, and the large cities. It does include the small towns and the smaller urban areas. They're just not farmers. Okay, so I think that's more of an accurate comparison to the U.S. Number. So that's what I circled the two red circles. I think should be compared. And now you see how China's labor force, um, like less, China has less percentage of people who are considered labor force, and then a very fewer percentage of Chinese people are employed when you compare that to the U.S. Um, the reason why I don't want to include the rural Chinese population is the U.S. farmers population is very, very small compared to China's farmers population. So if we back out the U.S. farmer population, it's probably you can ignore that for you can probably ignore the farmer population in the U.S. So that's what I think the urban Chinese demographics is more accurate, is a more of an accurate comparison to the American population. I just want to show you this comparison. So what does that mean? So you showed us a lot of numbers, right? So let me just quickly go over some of the summaries. I call this the summary of findings or my analysis. So it appears that, let me come back. Maybe it's better. Can you read this? Yeah. So it appears that rural labor force is essentially 100% employed, and they are either considered to be working in urban areas as part of the migrant workers, or at home working in agriculture. Older rural adults, no matter how old they are expected to work and support themselves. And so they are considered fully employed. And 86% of population living in rural Chinese in rural China work to support themselves, while only 41% in urban China work. The nearly 200 million unemployed people are all in urban areas. And of the 368 million urban labor force, only 164 million are employed. The rest 204 million don't have a job or are not working. And another way to look at it is China's cities and towns or urban areas have 459 million jobs. 296 million of them are filled by migrant workers, and the urbanites fill only 164 million jobs. Right, that's why I say migrant workers fill 64% of the urban jobs. During this decade, the past decade, China's total labor force of working age people declined from 866 million in 2012 to 786 million. It's a decline of 79 million people, or 9%. People say this is the result of the one-child policy that lasted 3 decades, and we started to see this being reflected in the labor force. But if you really think about it, this is a very important point. 78 million decline in labor force over 10 years is nothing when you compare with a 200 million annual unemployed labor force. It's not even 4% of the jobless people. So that's why the author of the report argued that it's a great irony that the Chinese government or the Chinese fear a labor shortage when it has so many people out of job. So that's I don't think people have realized that, and I think that's a very thought-provoking thought. I mean, a thought-provoking idea. If you really think about it, like everyone is talking about China's demographic decline, how China is losing labor. But in the past 10 years, the unemployment job is more of a job than the loss of labor force. So yeah. So, but I think there's another possibility. I think this discrepancy, why Beijing, why Xi Jinping is so concerned with the demographic decline, I think the discrepancy could be due to China's real population being severely overstated. This analysis is based on China having 1.4 billion people, and we know China doesn't have 1.4 billion people. I've already done a number of talks on that. So I think the other possibility is China's real population is not 1.4 billion. And so that may change the entire model, right? But China's biggest problem is it's 1.8 billion mu, the Chinese acre, the Chinese measurement for land, or 300, which is equivalent to 300 million acres arable land, cannot support or is not financially viable to support its 750 million rural population. At least 300 million of them have to seek employment in the cities, taking jobs from urban population. And this 300 million migrant workers working construction, manufacturing, and service jobs such as delivery, transportation. And these jobs are fast disappearing due to the real estate bubble, the loss of construction, the declining exports, right? The exodus of multinational manufacturers, right? The move of the supply chain out of China, and also the struggling domestic consumption. So these 300 million migrant workers, their employment prospect is a serious challenge. So I think China's unemployment rate of 26% in 2022 will go up, or has already gone up in 2023, because we have seen the large number of migrant workers losing their jobs and moving back to the countryside. So I think the rural unemployment rate will not be zero. We will see, or we actually have already seen unemployment in rural China. And in the urban area, I think the jobs that are left behind by the migrant workers, or some of the jobs that are still available in manufacturing or service, are being filled by the urbanites, but a lot of them don't want to do those blue collar jobs. So I think the rural unemployment would definitely go up. The urban unemployment, will remain steady at best. Um, but regardless, overall unemployment will be worse, and that's seriously worrisome. I understand there are other ways to calculate unemployment, and this is only a very high level guesstimate based on the methodology that a group of Chinese analysts presented 5 years ago. But I hope this give you an alternative perspective on China's unemployment rate. And I think it's very eye opening. All right, let me see if people have questions for me. All right, let me go through the super chats first. Thank you, Art, for the donation. Thank you. Let me see. All right. From that silencer. Thank you so much for this detailed comparison. Just for clarification, what is the current total population estimate in China? It's 1.4 billion. Estimate? Yeah. What's China's the official population is 1.4 billion. I don't think it's 1.4 billion. I think it's at most 1 billion, but it could be lower than that. But that's just my rough estimates. Yeah. I think it's somewhere near 1 billion, at most 1 billion. All right. Okay. I do want to clarify one thing. So if you notice the analysis by the analysts 5 years ago in 2017, the urban unemployment rate was all over 60%, and now it's according to my calculation, it's 55%. So you wonder, why has it go down? Um, how did the urban unemployment rate in China went down from over 60%, like 62, 63% to 55%? Well, this has to do with several things. One is total labor force declined in China. Total labor force declined in China, and then more migrant workers went go to China. I mean, go to urban area. So there are more urban jobs created from 2017, 2016 to now. So the amount of jobs in rural China reduced, and the amount of jobs in urban China increased. So more jobs are created in urban China, so that reduced the urban unemployment rate in China. So that's just my quick answer to you. But at 55%, it's still alarming. Could you imagine one in every two? It's not in one in every two people, because you have other people who are not part of the labor force. But for everyone that should be working, for every two people that should be working, only one has a job. So it's 50. Yeah, that's very sad. Thank you. Okay, so let me see question. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Okay, here's a question from Mitsu. Is it possible for China to see a USSR type collapse, or is a last gasp at conflict, i.e., a CCP distraction, guaranteed? Can we actually have hope for this? It's um I think I think I'm hopeful. I think the CCP, I mean, if you look at it, if you really look at these numbers, how could the regime last? So there's no doubt that the regime will collapse. But the question is, when it collapses, it will drag down a lot of countries or a lot of people. Um, because if people don't decouple, if the world still want to integrate, it still want to integrate the Chinese economy into the world supply chain, worldwide supply chain and economy. So when it falls, it's going to pull down a lot of the other populations and employments and economies. So that's what's dreadful. Moonwalker, since a since a military coup happened in Myanmar too, if there were to be a military coup in China, do you think whoever overthrows Xi would be even worse, as all military dictators are? I think likely. Um, if here's how you evaluate the situation. If the person who overthrows Xi Jinping also overthrows the Communist Party and end communism, if they want to make, if the person makes it very clear that they do not want to have a communist regime, they want to end the Communist Party, then I think that person is in the right direction. But if that person overthrows Xi Jinping and wants to keep the Communist Party, as the ruling party, as the only ruling party, then it could be worse. Seriously, yeah. All right, Sumiland, does China have migrant workers from outside China? Do people from China do migrant works in other countries? Yes. Do do people from China? Yes, people from China do migrant works in other countries. The Belt and Road projects, the infrastructure construction projects around the world are being carried out by Chinese construction workers, and many of them are migrant workers because these are really hard labor works done by the migrant workers. The other question: does China have migrant workers from outside China? I don't think so. Um, they not the labor, the blue collar labor intensive type of work, because China has plenty of that. What they want is people, like scientists, semiconductor, experts who are in experts in AI, semiconductors, those are what the Western migrant workers. There are different type of migrant workers. I'm sure there are, but I don't think there's a large number of them. From Silas Larson, I see that the PRC's economic expansion will slow like all countries in history, and their hyper growth era is over. Chinese get quite mad. Is the economy too much of their identity? Chinese get quite mad. Well, they get mad over a lot of things. So don't be don't be affected by their reaction. They react to many things unnecessarily. And the fact that they got mad, that probably means that you hit it on the nail. You got it right. Otherwise, they wouldn't be mad. And China's growth was over a while ago. And it's such an irony to see these world organizations like World Banks, these major financial institutions, still adjusting China's growth projection from like 5.3 to like 5.1. Do they really think China still has growth now? I mean, I think I made a video. Those of you who have not seen my last scripted video, um, that I released last Thursday, you should really watch it, because I think the whole world has been so obsessed with growth. Like if we don't have growth, growth of anything, our portfolio, the growth of the real estate market, the growth of a stock. If we don't see growth, then we feel like we're losing out on something. So I think the whole world, not just the Chinese, not just the CCP, has been so obsessed with growth. And so growth is like the default. We have to have growth. We cannot have contraction. It's only a matter. So if you lower the growth projection, then that's a contraction. That already has been the narrative for the world's economists. When we know that's not true, you know, the world cannot grow. I mean, at the rate that the economists projected or are projecting. So Charles Womack, thank you. What is the likelihood of Xi being put in a similar situation as Putin? It appears that Xi's security apparatus is multi-layered. Um, yeah, what's the likelihood? I mean, I made a number of videos on that topic whenever there's some subtle changes. Didn't we talk about the chief of his bodyguards recently died at the age of 60 something, a young age for a CCP leader. They all lived to their 90s and at least 80s, and this guy is in his 60s, and he suddenly died. And then there's no announcement about his death, so it's very, very strange, and that caught people's attention. Obviously, he's very concerned. Obviously, he's very, very concerned. But if you ask me the likelihood, I really cannot say anything because that's really a big statement. I say judging by the amount of precaution he's taking, judging by the paranoia exhibited over this subject, that you can tell that I can conclude that the likelihood is not small. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so paranoid, right? Let's see. Okay, so let me see. Is that all the question? Oh, from Digital Formosan. In Kunshan, 6,000 Taiwanese firms left China market for good. And even car brands are leaving in droves. Yes. Are there state-owned enterprises to absorb so many workers, or will they join the PLA? The state-owned enterprises are also cutting. They're cutting. It's very hard. So people just don't have a job. That's all. The PLA is drafting educated college grads or people with a master's degree. Yeah, they want to up the education level, the technical ability of the PLA soldiers. So they are recruiting, people, young people with advanced degrees into the PLA. There are a lot of people who just don't have a job right now. Unfortunately, that's the reality. Yeah, you're right. A lot of Taiwanese firms have left China. Car brands, yes, are leaving in droves. Yep. Simon Robinson, thank you. Thank you. Hold on, let me see. AM, late. It's not growth, but sizable growth. Marginal growth is no longer acceptable. Every year must be a new record reached. Growth is sustainable. Consistent record-breaking growth is impossible. You're right. Right. Yeah. Marginal growth is no longer acceptable. I mean, we in real life we know. Then what that means? It means we will blow the economy of the world into a gigantic bubble, and when it busts, I don't know what will happen. It's going to be very painful. All right. All righty. So I'll take one more question. I think I've answered all the questions. That's all. All righty. That's all for tonight. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you. See you next time. Thank you very much. Okay. Bye bye.